So the time has come. So hello, everyone. I'm glad you decided to join the fourth event in the Disciplined Talks series. My name is Martyna, and together with Marta, we will be your host.
Hello, everyone.
We promise that the next hour and a half will not be lost. As you probably know, Disciplined Talks is not a typical lecture or presentation, but a kind of conversation with an invited guest in which you can also actively participate. Prior to this event, you had the opportunity to send us some questions that will be addressed to Klaus today. But if you didn't message anything to us, or you didn't manage to do so, no worries. There will be Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in a chat anytime during the event. In terms of technical introduction, you can see it on the screen. Event is being recorded. If you don't follow our social media yet, this is a great opportunity. Not only you will learn many interesting facts, but we will also let you know when the recording will be available. For those of you who collect PDU points, they will be shown at the end and shared with you also by the email. Don't forget to change Zoom username to your real name and surname so we can verify your identity later. If all is clear, let's take a look at the agenda. Our meeting is divided into 3 parts. As always, we will start with a short introduction during which we will tell you a little bit more about PMI and our Disciplined Agile community. Then our special guest Klaus will join us, and we will deep dive into applying Disciplined Agile in the real world. In the end, as announced, a Q&A session and summary. And now over to Marta and PMI in a nutshell.
Okay, let's start from the what PMI is. PMI PC is a part of PMI Global, the world's leading professional association for a growing community of project professionals and change makers worldwide. The mission is to promote professionalism and to disturb the best practice in project management for business, organization, and academic centers. The most important part is to gather volunteers passionate about project management and with combined strength on organization of business seminars, workshops, and international PMI Poland chapter congress. Disciplined Agile community is a project created with a lot of passion and commitment. We wanted to create a space for both experienced agilists and beginners to share knowledge, recommended Disciplined Agile events around the world, promoted DA mindset, and of course, certification. All in all, our goals is to develop awareness and complex cases related to DA in Poland. DA community was formed in January 2021. Over the last couple months, we've been building knowledge base on our website, and we are establishing our presence on social media. Hope it sounds interesting enough that you want to join us. You can find links in the chat. And now it's time to finally, officially welcome our guest.
Thank you.
Klaus Boedker lives in beautiful Vancouver on Canada's West Coast. He is a certified Disciplined Agile coach and trainer with over 10 years of experience guiding organizations to successful value delivery by leveraging Agile, Lean, and traditional ways of working. Over the past decade, Klaus has worked with North America's largest companies to build awesome, self-sufficient teams that deliver innovative solutions early and often to the delight of their customers. Find him at LinkedIn if you want to connect.
Okay, so hi Klaus, we are glad to have you with us today. and we are going to cover a lot of interesting topics today. So let's jump to our first question. So, how do you get started with Disciplined Agile?
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to spend the next hour and a half with everyone here, and to talk to you more about Disciplined Agile, something I'm very passionate about. So, great question, and a great opening question. How do you get started with Disciplined Agile? I would say the best place to get started is to look at the Disciplined Agile mindset, and in particular, the Disciplined Agile principles, which we're going to be covering a little bit more in depth here later on. There are three principles I want to call out right now, which are context counts, and choice is good, and being pragmatic. And what I mean by those, and what I mean by calling them out when it comes to starting with Disciplined Agile, as you will see as well, Disciplined Agile is an agnostic way of working. It is a very empowering way of working, and it is a non-prescriptive way of working, meaning that the way that you work today is is the way you work today. And a lot of teams have they've formulated a way of working sort of organically over the years, and then never really sat down and reflected and thought about, well, how did we come to the point of how we're working together? And is it working for us? Are there points in there that we can change, we can improve? Are there points in there that's sort of a challenge for us? And that's exactly what Disciplined Agile is all about. To be conscious and be mindful and sort of reflective about, well, what is the way we're working today? What's working and what's not working? And then start sort of, taking something out and putting something in its place. And that's highlighted in those three Disciplined Agile principles that I called out. That context count, which means that your context is going to be different from this other team over here. So you should consequently have a slightly different way of working. We want to be pragmatic. That's the opposite of that is purist. We do not want to be purist. Purist means that you follow one way of working and only one way, regardless of your context. And that will fit some teams, which is great, but most teams will not fit that purist way of working because their context is different. It doesn't fit that. And then whatever methodology, whatever way of working we've picked ends up doing more harm than good. And then the last one, choice is good. Again, imagine if we only had one choice in the way we work. Well, then we couldn't be pragmatic. We couldn't take your context into consideration. So choice is good. So we in Disciplined Agile, as you'll see as well, as we get more into the presentation, we offer up choice because we think that's a really good idea, that you have more than one choice. Now, that can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. So there are some sort of tips and tricks about how not to become overwhelmed by all those choices that you have to make. So in summary, a great place to start with Disciplined Agile is simply to recognize that we have a way of working today, what's working, what's not working for us, and then starting sort of getting into that mindset of, well, context count. So we're going to have a unique way of working, being pragmatic, don't be purist, and finally, choice is good. So offer up more choices to the team than just a single choice. All right, I could keep going, but let's pause here for a moment and see if there are some more questions.
Yes, we have next question, which I believe will be a piece of cake for you. So what is Disciplined Agile and how does it differ from Scrum?
Right, great question. Thank you for sharing that as well. So that's also a really good place to start, and sort of also in terms of starting to think about Disciplined Agile and what it is if we look at it from sort of a more an abstract level as opposed to a concrete level. So from an abstract point of view, comparing Disciplined Agile to Scrum, and you will hear me do this, a couple of times throughout the presentation here tonight, because Scrum is bad and you shouldn't do Scrum. Scrum is great if it fits your context. If your work is plannable, if you have a team that have not done Agile before, if you, I would say, let's stick with those two, that your work is plannable and you have a team that's relatively inexperienced with Agile, Scrum is a great fit, most likely, because out of the box, Scrum gives you a way of working that you're like, okay, this is it. We have to do these Scrum sessions, these Scrum events. We have to have a retrospective every 2 weeks or whatever your cadence is. We have to have a demonstration of the work we've done. So without having to think about it, for a new team to Agile, they get all these great practices sort of for free. They're right there. that's the first part that's good about Scrum. The second thing is that if your work is plannable, well, then you can plan out for a week or two, again, depending on how long your sprints are. And it usually works really well for teams that are in that particular situation. Now, that's sort of where if you will, the goodness about Scrum starts to stop, because I'm sure you've experienced this as well with teams that are practicing Scrum, is that it's great, it's simple, it's kept simple on purpose, so teams can pick it up relatively quickly, over a month, 2, 3 months, depending on the team. They get the mechanics, they get the steps in there, and they start to run this way. Now, I'm sure you've discovered that, and I'm sure you've also discovered that at some point the team comes across something, a challenge, a problem, something that's not working, that Scrum has no answer for. And you go, oh, well, what do we do now? You look in your Scrum guide, which I have over here. So you look in your Scrum guide and you go, well, I don't know. It doesn't say anything about that. What do we do now? And that's where Disciplined Agile comes in, because Disciplined Agile gives you more ideas and more options and more choices. And Disciplined Agile has an answer for a lot of challenges that you're going to be facing as an Agile team in an organization. So to summarize, is you can say that Scrum is is capsulated inside Disciplined Agile. It's a great place to start, again, if your work is plannable, if your team is relatively new to Agile, and it's capsulated inside Disciplined Agile. And then to start running with that from a very concrete standpoint. And then once you get to a point where where Scrum is silent, Scrum has no answers for this, you go, well, instead of going to Google and I'm just going to look up, how do we do this? Go to Disciplined Agile, go to the DA toolkit, which we're going to see again a little bit later on, and then find some of the answers there, because as opposed to Google, which is sort of a free-for-all, Disciplined Agile is a curated, architected, well thought out and well laid out not framework, but toolkit, where you can go and find these options and these choices. So yeah, that's how they differ. Thank you.
Thank you for when you answer. I can wait for your presentation because it sounds great. So I will tell about the third question is, what is Disciplined Agile and how does it differ from SAFe?
Thank you. Also a very good question. And it's actually interesting about these 2 points here, the purple and the blue question right there, is that those are probably the 2 most popular Agile ways of working right now. Scrum is what most teams start with, because most teams' work is plannable. And most teams, well, when they start with Agile, they're new to Agile, sort of per definition. And also simple, right? It's easy to learn. I think that's another reason that a lot of teams will start with Scrum. And it's popular. You go, well, I've heard of Scrum. We've all heard of Scrum. So let's start there. SAFe is sort of a similar boat, but again on a different scale, on a different level, because that's about it's about scaling agility across the organization. So how does Disciplined Agile differ from that, or what are some of the similarities? You can actually draw a parallel between what I talked about Scrum and what SAFe is, because again, SAFe, or some SAFe mechanics and some SAFe ways of working, is actually encapsulated inside Disciplined Agile. It is what we call the program lifecycle, and we will get to talk a little bit more about that later on as well in the presentation. So SAFe was created to, in simplistic terms, SAFe was created to deal with a large program inside our organization. As in, for example, John Deere that produces tractors. They have a large program of making a new tractor. And for that tractor, we need some hardware teams and we need some software teams. And they need to work together and integrate frequently. So when the tractor rolls off, the production line, it actually works. So that's really what SAFe is built for, that it's built for this really large program across the organization. Now, that's fantastic if your organization is that. If your organization has a large program, SAFe is a great place to start because that's what it's built for. Same thing with Scrum. Scrum is built for teams that are new to Agile, that have plannable work. If that is your context, you should absolutely do that. Again, SAFe does not have all the answers. I'm sure if you're practicing SAFe, I'm sure at some point you've come across a point where, well, SAFe doesn't have an answer to that. What do we do in this situation? Or perhaps more often, what more often happens is that, well, SAFe sort of work for us. We have a program over here, but we also have other teams in the organization that are not part of the program. What do we do with those? And again, SAFe has no answer for that. SAFe says, well, it's for a program. It should all be part of the program. So I've been in an organization where SAFe was applied, and it worked well for the teams that were part of this large program. And then they had like 3 or 4 other teams which were not, and they were being sort of forced into being part of the big sprint planning and forced to be part of that agile release train. And it didn't work very well for them. They could see right away that, well, we don't really need to be here. And SAFe doesn't have an answer for that. Again, Disciplined Agile does. To go, oh, great, you have a program inside your organization. Let's run the program lifecycle, because, well, that's built for exactly that. A coordination and collaboration between, a large number of teams under one program umbrella. And, oh, by the way, we also have these 3, 4, 5 teams over here that are not part of the program. Oh, we have an answer for that as well. Well, they can practice Scrum or Kanban or something else, that whatever fits them, let them do their thing over there. And if we apply Disciplined Agile as opposed to SAFe, we can run both instances at the same time seamlessly and smoothly. And they also start to speak the same language, which, again, we'll see a little bit later on here in the presentation, that what Disciplined Agile gives you, it gives you a choice to both organize in a program if you have that, and organize in individual teams if you have that, yet they still speak the same language, across the organization. And that helps increase our agility and increase the way that we coordinate and collaborate, again, between teams, between programs, and so on and so forth. All right, I'm going to pause here. I think that was almost about 10 minutes.
When you're talking about DA, Scrum, SAFe, everything sounds super easy. So let's focus on our next question. Can Disciplined Agile be used for non-software teams?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure you've come across instances where Scrum, for example, is applied to non-software teams. So there's some really cool things going on with Scrum that are doing, like Scrum for school and Scrum for high school. There are hardware teams using Scrum, people that build cars, they're using Scrum as well. So it's absolutely applicable. Those practices are applicable in other instances. And same thing with Disciplined Agile. So there is an example of, in the presentation that we're going to go into here shortly, there is an example of a non-software team, actually from PMI, which uses elements from Disciplined Agile to increase their level of agility and to increase their sort of efficiency in terms of how they work and continuously evolve the way they work. Because this is, again, a key point of Disciplined Agile, that we want to continuously evolve the way we work, to both get better at what we do, and also to match when our context evolves, when our either internal context, inside our organization, or external context. A great example is what we've all been living through the past couple of years with COVID. That is certainly an example of something externally changing in your situation, and we then have to respond to that. So that's an example that we're going to look a little bit closer at here later on. But absolutely, DA can be applied to non-software teams. And in fact, what Disciplined Agile has, so Disciplined Agile is, hang on, where do I have that? Here we go. We'll see this in a moment as well. So this is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is what we call the big picture of Disciplined Agile. And you can see this top row right here. These are all non-software teams. It's finance, it's HR, it's procurement, it's marketing, it's sales. Those are all areas that are part of the Disciplined Agile sort of methodology and Disciplined Agile way of working, which means that for each of these areas, which are very non-software, HR, finance, sales, marketing, Disciplined Agile has choices and options about how can these areas start to work in a more agile way. So not only can it be applied, it is being applied, and it comes with sort of answers out of the box of how non-software teams can start to work in a more agile and lean way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And the last question, but not the least today. So, what are the best benefits of using DA? What are the downsiders?
Well, I hope I highlighted some of the benefits already. So summarizing some of those, it empowers your team to find, it empowers and encourages your team and your organization generally to find ways of working that fits their context, right? It's really, and again, I'm sure you've discovered this in your work, working with teams and being on teams, that it's sort of when something starts to feel awkward and it doesn't feel quite right in the way we're working, most other ways of working to go, well, they don't say this directly, but sort of between the lines to go, well, too bad, you have to follow the Scrum guide, or you have to follow what SAFe says. We give you no other choices. And then it's up to you to go, well, what do I do now? And then you have to go out, maybe Google the answer, see if someone has already solved this before. Whereas Disciplined Agile goes, well, when something starts to feel a little awkward and a little strange, a little weird in the way that we work in our teams, you go, well, okay, great. That's an indicator that something, needs to be tweaked and improved. And then we encourage and empower the teams to then go out using the DA toolkit to explore that and use that as a guidance to, well, what else can we do? Where is it? What is it that's causing it to feel awkward and weird and a little, something's not right here? So you find that area, and then you go in there further and you dive into, maybe it's the way we're estimating. We're using planning poker today, and it's like, what, it's not quite working. We're not getting it, or it's too slow, or whatever it is. So you can go into the toolkit, find where we estimate work, and find 3 or 4 or 5 other ways of doing it. It's like, oh, I didn't know they existed, and let's try this one here, and see if that works better. So that is the primary benefit of Disciplined Agile, along with the fact that it's built for, it takes an enterprise-wide view. Scrum takes a view of just the team. SAFe takes a view of releasing work in a large program, and it's larger than Scrum, obviously. Yet it still leaves out other areas that that are key to an organization, such as procurement, HR, finance, marketing, sales. Those are also key to an organization, and those are left out of the Scale Agile framework. Whereas DA takes an entire sort of enterprise view, as you saw, briefly on this one here. We'll look more closely at that. So those are, I would highlight those as the 2 key benefits. Thank you.
Wow, that was very inspiring. Klaus, we know that you prepared a presentation about applying DA in the real world, especially for today's meeting. But before, we would like to ask a few questions also our participants. Guys, yes. You will see a pop-up with very, very short query. So please give us your answers. And in the meantime, Klaus, the stage is yours.
Do you want me to share my presentation in the background now?
Yes, please.
All right, I will go ahead and do that. Let me know when you want me to get started.
Sure, we are waiting for results of our short survey, and then yes, we can start.
I think the results are now shown.
Yeah, look at that. IT, more than half.
Also that most of you use agile methodologies in your organization, 73%. And we have also some people who just getting to know with DA, so really interesting. And some participants also have Disciplined Agile certification, so perfect.
Great, so let's deep dive into applying DA in the real world. I think everyone is waiting for that moment.
All right, thank you. Whoops, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's look more closely at applying Disciplined Agile in the real world. And like I said, with the opening questions, and thank you for sharing those, we're going to touch on some of those examples as well as we just talked about. Yet we're going to dive a little bit deeper into them. So my name is Klaus, as I'm sure you've discovered by now. And when I'm not working, even though my name sounds Germanic, I am really from Denmark. When I'm not working, I enjoy taking our dog for a hike in the local mountains, and I also really enjoy photography. And here's a photo that I captured from Tanzania. Today, as was mentioned, today I live in Vancouver on the beautiful west coast of Canada. So when I am working, I am part of PMI's Enterprise Project Management Office, and we empower change makers that are both students, volunteers, entrepreneurs, and specialists, of business leaders of any age and background, really. And what we all have in common is this drive to bring positive change into the world. And we give you the tools to succeed. Project management skills and agile practices, they don't just help organizations and teams get things done. They help people get things done inside and outside of work. And really anyone who needs to get something done uses a blend of both project management and agile and lean practices and skills. So today, or tonight for you, we are going to explore what Disciplined Agile is, or a brief overview of that. And there's going to be a little bit of repetition, and we're obviously going to add some more into it and sort of put it together in a more organized fashion than we just talked about here with the opening questions. Then we're going to look at using Disciplined Agile to scale Agile across a large, complex program, and how to apply Disciplined Agile to a non-software team. Then we're going to look at patterns and anti-patterns of how evolving your way of working, or your WOW. And then we're going to wrap up with some Q&A. And by the way, feel free to ask questions along the way in the chat. We're also going to be using the chat. There's some sort of interactive questions throughout this presentation. So please use the chat to fill in, to share your answer there as well. As we get started here, though, I can encourage you to either get some pen and paper, or somewhere else, take down some notes as we go through this. And the first point that I'd like you to consider is this question right here: what is your current knowledge of Disciplined Agile on a scale of 1 to 10? So 1 being I don't really know anything about Disciplined Agile, and 10 I know it all. Like, where do you fall on that roughly? And again, obviously this is a subjective scale, so you're going to score this slightly different in your head than someone else will. And it's not really about comparing each other. This is really just about to sort of right now, sort of put a stake in the ground and say, well, what is my current knowledge here this wonderful evening of Disciplined Agile? Well, I assume the weather is good. The weather's nice here in Vancouver right now. Hopefully the weather's nice where you are too. All right, so just write that down somewhere, on a piece of paper or Post-it, and hang on to that, because we are going to get back to that question a little bit later on. So, what is a Disciplined Agile? Disciplined Agile gives you the freedom to choose, as in find our own way of working, or our WOW, that is fit for what we work on, how we work, and the constraints that we face at work. And I think that's really important, that it's not just about what we work on, but it's also how we want to work, and more importantly, what are the constraints that we're faced with? Because it's you have to consider more than just one point. You have to consider. It's important to consider also the work we do, the constraints, and Disciplined Agile takes that into consideration and says, this is great, let's find a wow or a way of working that is suitable for what you're faced with. It gives you Disciplined Agile. It's a toolkit, and we'll see an example of the online toolkit here throughout this presentation, where the team's choices then, they come in the form of agile, lean, and traditional practices, techniques that are then captured, organized, architected into what we call the DA toolkit. And finally, you can also think about Disciplined Agile sort of as a map and compass, as in once the teams learn how to read the map and the compass, as in how to navigate the toolkit, you will get this plethora, this myriad of agile, lean, and traditional choices that are right at your fingertips. And it's sort of like, when the first time you looked at a map, you may go, well, I don't know how to read that. What does these little, brown squiggly line means, the contour lines? What's north, what's south? What does that mean? You're like, we're a bit lost. And the Disciplined Agile toolkit is going to feel similar in the sense that when you first see it, it's like, wow, this is really overwhelming and I don't know where to start. I can't really navigate it. Yet once you learn how to navigate it, it becomes second nature of knowing where to go to find things. There's also a great search functionality, which of course you can use as well. And then think of it this way, that over time, it becomes sort of your own personal toolbox that you can always open up to find these choices and these ways of working and practices that fits your context. Disciplined Agile also takes the phased approach. We'll look a little bit more closely at this later on, but just to give you sort of a flavor of this right now, that most Agile teams, they use phases when they deliver work. So why not give them a proven structure to do so? I remember when I practiced Scrum, in the beginning, we'd have to make up this thing called Sprint Zero. And if you look at the Scrum guide, there is no such thing as a Sprint Zero. So this is the example of Scrum teams knowing that they need some period to get ready before they start this. They embark on this new feature they're building, or something, some other piece of work that's relatively large and relatively significant. Like, we need to get properly ready. Well, that's what we have the inception phase for in Disciplined Agile. And that's to do just enough work to get organized and get going in the right direction. And it ends with, we have what we call sort of a common vision or stakeholder vision, where the team agrees, all the key stakeholders agree that this is roughly what we're building. This is roughly how long it takes. These are the people on the teams. These are the risks we see, and so on and so forth. We call those out. And then we go, yes, there's agreement. Now we can start the work. And starting the work is the construction phase, the next phase, where the goal is to produce this consumable solution with just enough functionality that it's still of value to our stakeholders. And then we go, oh, well, what do we do now? And again, having worked on Scrum teams and, in the beginning of my Agile journey, we would make up sprint names for that too. Oh, it's a hardening sprint, or it's a release sprint, or something like that. And again, the Scrum guide, has no mention whatsoever of that. It's just terms Scrum teams have thought of because they need some time in the end, well, usually sometime in the end, to get ready to successfully release the product or service that we just built into the hands of our stakeholders. And that could be, maybe we need to run regression tests. Maybe we need to run load tests or performance tests. Maybe we need to write training material for our help desk. Maybe we need to write FAQ for our help desk. Maybe we need to have the right, description on our marketing pages so they release when the product goes live. Whatever it may be, these are all really important points that we need to successfully launch this product or service that we've just built. So that is the transition phase. The principles. So I talked about the mindset early on in the beginning with the opening questions, and I highlighted 3 of these principles right here. So you can see there are 8 in total, and let's have a look at them. So the first one is delighting customers, as in, if we don't, well, someone else will, and then they might steal our customers away from us. Being awesome, that we want to strive to be the best versions of ourselves that we possibly can be. Context counts, being pragmatic, and choice is good. Again, I mentioned those, just tying a couple more words to those. So context count, we face unique situations and they evolve over time. So we need to take those into consideration. We want to be pragmatic. Our goal is not to be purist and follow one way of working. Our goal is to be as effective as we can be and improve from there. That's being pragmatic. Again, choice is good. We would rather offer up more than one choice, because if we only had one choice, we're like, if that doesn't fit us, then we're stuck, and that, nothing really good comes out of that. We want to optimize flow, and sometimes that can be a bit inconvenient, but overall it makes us able to be more effective or respond more effectively to our customers. So here, Optimize flow means that we want to look at our entire company, organization or value stream rather. How does work flows in? What are the different sort of stages and steps and teams it flows through, and where does it flow out again back to the customer? We want to optimize that entire sort of stream of flow, not just our own little bubble, our own little team here, and just focus on that. That is not, even though it's can be very convenient, it doesn't usually lead to anything in terms of becoming better and more effective at responding to our customers and delivering value more quickly into the hands of them. Similar to that is that we want to organize around products and services, as in meaning we have these value streams throughout the organization, and they usually go across multiple teams. In most organizations, they're organized sort of this way, in the shape of a pyramid, where we have these different sort of work streams or different silos, different groups, and all of that. And yet work doesn't flow like this down one single stream or one single silo. It flows across multiple teams. So we want to start organizing around that inside our organizations and inside our companies, because that way, again, we'll be able to deliver value more quickly into the hands of our customers. And then finally, enterprise aware. This is a bit of a unique one as well for Disciplined Agile. A lot of ways to work and do not talk about this, that we want to look beyond just our own short-term needs and, what do I need right now and what would make, my work go really well, and take more of this long-term need of the organization into account. So a good example of that is, well, if something makes sense for me, you don't just go ahead and do it. You want to make sure that, one, if I make this change to my way of working, which may fit me and it may be very convenient for me and my team, well, are we going to impact other teams in a negative way? Are we going to get sort of, inadvertently or as an unintended consequence, are we going to start to get in their way? Are we going to work in a way that doesn't fit other teams suddenly anymore? And that actually overall slows down the flow inside our company. So that is exactly being enterprise aware. It also means that if we're faced with a challenge, we don't just go ahead and, let's start solving it. Let's check around with our neighboring teams of who have faced something similar to this. How did they solve it? And then learn from that, and maybe even repurpose some of the solution that they in terms of how they solved that challenge they were faced with. So enterprise aware, again, a bit of a unique principle you don't really find in a lot of other ways of working. So in short, disciplined agile teams, they start where they are, they improve incrementally from there, and they always strive to get better. That really is, to me, this sentence really highlights what disciplined agile is about, and also about, well, where we, part of that opening question is about how do we get started? Well, you start where you are. You make the commitment to yourself of improving incrementally, and the commitment to yourself and inside your organization about always striving to get better. So let's do our first quiz time. And if you can type in the chat, I'll move the chat over here so I can see it as well. So, just type in the chat whatever you think the answer is. So we're gonna do a true and false. So you can just type true or false. So you can just type T and F in there. And this here is the first question. So true or false? The inception phase ends with an agreement between the team and the stakeholders about the work that they're about to do. What do you think? True or false? You can type that into the chat, or simply just type T or F. All right, we're seeing some trues, some T's. Yes, I agree. That is true. All right, let's do the next one. True or false? The goal of the construction phase is to produce sufficient functionality for our customers. Is that true or false? So again, just type it into the chat, T or F, or type true or false. So the goal of the construction phase is to produce enough functionality, sufficient functionality for our customers. I'm seeing a lot of true. Yes, I agree. That is true. All right, last one. True or false? Be purist is one of the Disciplined Agile principles. What do you think? True or false? I'm seeing some false. All right, you guys are good. Yes, that is false. No, it is not be purist. It is be pragmatic. Moving on. Section 2, so using Disciplined Agile to scale Agile across a large, complex program. Let's look more closely at this. So the context is ICBC. So meet ICBC. It is what is called the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, which issues insurance for cars and trucks and so on and so forth here in the province of British Columbia in Canada. In 2018, they set out to modernize how auto insurance was calculated. And that program consisted of 8 teams spread across 3 distinct departments. So I would describe that as a fairly large program. Obviously, there are larger programs, and I guess they're also smaller, but it's a good sized program. And it was something, what made it complex was that they were, again, spread across 3 distinct departments, which had sort of each their own way of working, and they had, separate systems in there. What also made it complex was that this had the eye of the public. So the public here in British Columbia, they've been complaining for a while about how the way that we calculate our car insurance in this province is very outdated compared to other provinces in Canada. And they're like, well, why can't we do that? So it had the eye of the public. Of course, when something has the eye of the public, it has the eye of our politicians as well. So there are lots of stake in this program. The challenge is that, they had an increased need for coordination and collaboration. So faced with this situation where the teams, they're codependent for successfully delivering this new insurance calculations, how can this organization get the teams to become better at coordinating and collaborating? That was sort of the challenge that they were faced with because they had never run these large programs before in an agile way. And the solution is that, ICBC, they applied Disciplined Agile to this. So concretely, they applied sort of 3 elements we can pull out for this presentation right here. One being that they created a unified language using Disciplined Agile across the program. They used the program lifecycle, and finally, they utilized the DA toolkit to evolve their ways of working, plural, because there's more than just one. You have this large program. There's going to be more than one way of working inside that program. Whenever the context evolved, both internally and externally. So let's look more closely at the first point. The first point is that really, we can phrase it as a question, as in what does your agile language focus on? So and let's take let's make it, in simplistic terms, let's simplify it a little bit. And if you look at Scrum, the language of Scrum is to focus on the delivery team. It doesn't really mention anything else than that. So that is a language. So if you're practicing Scrum, your agile language revolves around teams. That becomes your agile language. If you're practicing SAFe, your agile language becomes focused and sort of revolving around delivering value through a large program. You hear release train and release train engineer, and you'll hear that a lot in there. And that is the language of SAFe. So if you adopt SAFe, your agile language will be focusing on delivering value through a large program across the organization. Finally, there's DA. So if you adopt DA, your agile language then becomes focused on the entire enterprise. Inside that, obviously, we'll have sort of local language of, we have a language also for teams, we have a language for program, but overall, the agile language of Disciplined Agile is focused on the entire enterprise. So you can see this is the same one that I was holding up just before, where you have these different hexagons which represent different sort of functional areas of your company. There's sales, there's marketing, there's governance, there's strategy, there's legal, vendor management, procurement, so on and so forth. And each of those areas, they're all, even though they practice agile and lean in a different way, they're all tied together through this unifying language that Disciplined Agile is. And some examples of that. So role names are, first of all, they're agnostic from a methodology standpoint. So you can see that the team member, obviously, that's pretty agnostic. We have an architecture owner, that's someone who's responsible for the architecture, and sort of whatever you build is done in an architecturally sound way. So when it goes and comes in the hands of the customers, it doesn't suddenly break. We have a product owner. Again, that's a pretty agnostic term. And then we don't call the person that process leader. We don't call it a scrum master or anything like that. We call it a team lead. That is the agnostic term here, which means that you can then apply these role names across a wide range of teams. That's why it's important that they're agnostic. Of course, if you're practicing Scrum, combined with DA and you prefer to use the term Scrum Master, that makes sense in your organization, well, then continue to use the term Scrum Master. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just we give you as a starting point some agnostic names that you can then tweak and use so it fits your context. Stakeholder, again, very generic way of describing the people who have a stake in the work that the team is building. And then finally, we have some supporting roles as well. Again, they're fairly generic in the way that we write them here at agnostic. So specialist, independent testers, domain expert, integrator, so on and so forth. And these roles will often need those when we need to scale agility. The other way is that, that Disciplined Agile gave ICBC a sort of a unifying language across the enterprise is that, well, everyone knows what the phases mean. So if someone, you have two teams talking together and they go, well, we're about to go into inception phase, to go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Or, another team, they'll come and, well, today they won't go knock on your door because very few people in the office anymore. But they'll send you a message over Teams, over Slack, or, whatever you're using, and they'll go, hey, we're about to do transition and I could really need your help for that. And then the other team goes, yeah, I know what that is because we're using those phases as well. So that is another point of creating this unifying language that ICBC experienced. And finally, the toolkit. So when I say, hey, we need to plan the release, can you come help with that? They're like, yeah, I know where to find the information because I've gotten familiar, I've gotten comfortable with using the Disciplined Agile toolkit. So when someone asks me to, hey, you got to be sure to plan the release, I'm like, yeah, I know where to find that information. And then we can then go into the toolkit and look more closely at the options and choices that we have. So let's pause here for a moment and let's have a look at the toolkit. So I will, so I'm already sharing my screen, so you should be able to see my browser right here. So to find the toolkit, you simply go to pmi.org/disciplined agile, and then you go under resources. There's obviously a direct link, but I'll show you sort of the formal way of getting there. And you click Disciplined Agile browser under resources. And then this comes up and you can see there are different versions right here. The current most recent version is 5.5. And there are some older ones here where some of them have been translated into other languages. Obviously, as we're releasing newer ones, sort of the translations are catching up, so they will be released as well afterwards. Then you click on the most recent version, and that opens up. And ta-da, here is this online DA toolkit, also sometimes called the DA browser. And over here, remember we were talking about planning the release. So, well, how do we find that? Well, I happen to know that plan the release is an inception goal. So I simply click there and then I get all these choices right here and all these points that I sort of need to think about. So this is the goal, plan the release. That's what I want to do. Then there are certain decision points that you may or may not want to consider. So for example, well, I want to think more about, well, how do we estimate our work? Well, then I look more closely at estimation strategy. And as you can see here, we talk about there's planning poker there, and there are all these other ways of estimating as well. Well, maybe we've done planning poker for a while, but it's not really working for us. I want to try something else. So similar sized item, that sounds like a great thing. What is it? Let me read more about it. And that's what you have down here whoops, let me just pull this little area up here. So similar sized items, you can see right here that we get this sort of a description, and we get some trade-offs over here. So similar sized items is that all work items are created so that they are close to the same amount of effort. And then there are some trade-offs over here that says, well, this is a form of no estimates because we merely have to count the number of similar sized work items. And sometimes the work item is broken down too much in an effort to similar sized items, resulting in the need to track the various parts that make up the whole. So these are some trade-offs that if I go ahead with this, well, you should know that here's something, positive, and here's something that might detract from that. I'm going to throw in two more points, and then we're going to go back to the presentation. And I realize this is, this is a lot of information. But again, remember, it's sort of like the first time you saw a map, you're like, well, again, what does the contour line mean? What does north mean? I don't really know. And similar here. So this is going to look a little bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing at first. So the two other points I want to mention is that you'll see some of them have an arrow pointing up. That means that what's at the top is more preferable than what's at the bottom when it comes to increasing your level of agility. So meaning that, where's a good example of that? Here, source of the plan. How, who's putting the plan together? Is it manager driven or is it a self-organizing team? Well, in terms of increasing the team's agility, we know that if we put the team in charge of self-organizing around creating this release plan, well, then they become even more self-organizing and their agility goes up as opposed to having a manager put their release plan together for them. The other thing I want to point out, the second thing is that you'll see some of these items are bolded and italicized. And that means that not, everything else being equal, not knowing anything about your context, this is a really good place to start. As in, when it comes to putting the plan together, the release plan, it's a really good place to start, having the team do this themselves, as opposed to having it being manager driven. Same thing with over here with estimating. Well, it's a really, affinity estimation is a really good place to start. When it comes to choosing an estimation unit, relative points is a really good place to start. When it comes to capturing the plan, well, a burn-up chart, maybe a high-level Gantt chart, those are really good places to start as well. So that's what it means when something is bolded and italicized. Now, for example, let's just say that you couldn't remember, where something was or anything like that. Then we also have a search functionality. So let's just search up here. So I'm going to look up planning poker. I don't know where that is. I'm just going to look it up. And you can see over here, we get results for it. So I click on here and then it pulls me out, points me right to where that lives inside, whatever goal diagram it is. All right. So that was a sort of a, I guess 180 seconds on the DA toolkit, the online DA toolkit, or sometimes also called the DA browser. All right. So ICBC, so that was the first point around using Disciplined Agile to create this unifying language. The second point that ICBC took advantage of was using what we call the program lifecycle to deliver this large, complex program. So here is the program lifecycle. And if you practice SAFe or some other scaling methodology, you can recognize some of the points in here. So for example, here we have a number of teams that are doing parallel development on this program. Well, we need to coordinate that work. Well, we coordinate both sort of the people side and process side. We coordinate the architecture between the different teams, and we coordinate the work itself. And this is, for example, the product owners would get together here and coordinate at a little bit higher level the work items between all the teams and the dependencies. The architecture owners would get together and coordinate the architecture and sort of the technical side and solution between the different teams. And the Scrum Masters would get together and coordinate sort of that people and process aspect across the different teams. Then we do frequent integrations and cross-team testing. And then at some point we release out into the hands of our customers. Obviously we need IT operations and support to help with that as well. So that is the program lifecycle. And this is how, using Disciplined Agile, that ICBC was able to organize into a large program using this lifecycle right here. They also used, again, the DA toolkit, and they took advantage of, we have a goal diagram. We have a goal for coordinated activity. So they used this to explore different options. And let's go back to the toolkit. So coordinate activities, I happen to know that is down here under ongoing goals. And you can see there are quite a number of options and practices that you can look at. So for example, they looked at coordinate across the program. Well, they said, we think that Scrum of Scrums that's really going to help us out. We're going to have facilitators that are working sessions from time to time. We're also going to need an architecture team who can coordinate the architecture and sort of the technical solution between the team. And what else did they do? Yes, they also had a product owner team. The product owners got together from time to time, and then they coordinated the product and the work items and the dependencies between the different teams. So that was a concrete way that ICBC took advantage of the toolkit and the options and choices they have in here for them to better coordinate and better deliver this program. All right. And lastly, they utilize the toolkit to evolve their way of working. So again, summarizing that is that you start where you are. That was sort of the mentality they took on, is that we start where we are. We want to improve incrementally, and we always strive to get better. For example, there was a concrete example of one team at ICBC wanted to update their life cycle to better match their changed context. And the team had been practicing Scrum for a couple of years, and they were getting pretty good at it. And they felt like they had the maturity to switch to a lean life cycle, which is based on Kanban and continuous flow, because that would give us that would give the team more flexibility, and it allow them to better deal with the sort of the increasing amount of unplannable work. And they were at this point in maturity where they didn't really need a way of working telling them to, well, every 2 weeks you have to stop up and reflect. Every 2 weeks you have to demonstrate your work to your stakeholders. They've gotten to the point where, you know what, we can figure this out ourselves. We don't need Scrum to tell us that. So we do retrospectives whenever we need them. Whenever something comes up, we'll stop up, we'll solve it right there. And we do demos to our stakeholders whenever they need them. So again, on a more continuous flow basis. So here is the select life cycle choices. You can see we have a number of different ones in there, where we have the agile life cycle, the lean life cycle, which is what they switch from. Again, there are also other ways of working when you select the life cycle. There is the less, there's Nexus, there's Safe, there's the Scrum. You can choose Serial, which is the traditional waterfall way of working. So again, choice is good. Again, we want to give teams choice to pick a life cycle which is something that fits their context. The teams at ICBC are examples of they wanted to speed up their estimation. And we've talked a little bit about this. So I'm just diving a little bit more into this, that there's another delivery team in the organization who wanted to become faster at estimating. And they've been using planning focus so far. And they were they were asking the Scrum Master, well, is there another way, a faster way of estimating our work? They'll give us, almost the same result, almost the same quality, but we don't have to spend nearly as much time doing it. And then the Scrum Master went, they went and looked at the toolkit, and they said, well, let's look more closely at the relatively mass/grit estimation technique. And they explored that, and they started using that. They switched from planning focus, and they switched to using that because it was there in the toolkit for them to explore and experiment with, to go, well, let's try this out. We think this will be faster. All right. And those are some concrete examples. So let's do one more round of questions, one more quiz. So this is sort of titled, Do You Remember? All right, here we go. So again, please use the chat to type in what you think the answer is. So what view does Disciplined Agile take? Is it an enterprise view, a team view, a program view, or an individual view? What do you think? 1, 2, 3, or 4? I'll give you a moment to answer that. All right, lots of ones. Fantastic. And yes, DA does take this enterprise view. Exactly. All right, next one. Which role is not a DA specific team role? Is it team lead, product owner, Scrum Master, or architecture owner? Which role was not specifically called out on the on that role overview, that role chart you saw? Is it team lead, product owner, Scrum Master, or architect owner? All right, I'm seeing mostly Scrum Master, and you are absolutely right. Again, that doesn't mean that you can't call your team lead a Scrum Master. It just means that DA has chosen an agnostic language. So we're using team lead instead of Scrum Master. And last one, do you have to be a PMI member to get access to the online DA toolkit? What do you think? Does it require a PMI membership? Yes or no? Oh, wow. Overwhelmingly no. You're absolutely right. It is free, which is fantastic. It is a fantastic sort of asset to have at your fingertips. Once you become more familiar and more comfortable using it, it is just an amazing asset and resource to have at your fingertips. So no, you do not require a PMI membership to get access to the DA toolkit. Next one, section 3 or topic 3, applying DA to a non-software team. Let's have a look at that. So the context is meet the DA learning team at PMI. So the Disciplined Agile learning team here at PMI is responsible for producing, maintaining, and improving our DA courseware. And they wanted to adopt a part of Disciplined Agile into their way of working. And by the way, that building right there is from Philadelphia, which is where the head office of just outside Philadelphia, where PMI is. All right. The challenge is that this team is working with a complex set of both internal and external stakeholders. So you can imagine internally, we have stakeholders in terms of we have the team that's responsible for certification. We have the team that's responsible for getting the courseware into the hands of our instructors. We have stakeholders in terms of marketing. We have stakeholders in terms of sale. We have stakeholders in terms of subject matter expert. Externally, we have stakeholders of the instructors. We have stakeholders of the ATP organizations. We have stakeholders of the students that are going to be consuming this courseware. So a very wide set of sort of complex set of internal and external stakeholders. That was what they were faced with. And that made it more difficult to maintain, improve, and produce this courseware. So, and also this environment of stakeholders was sort of ever-changing landscape. They kept evolving. Other people kept, getting involved, and people would roll off. So it was, I think overall the summary of that, it was a complex landscape. It's a pretty good summary of that. The solution was that the learning team, they started to apply Disciplined Agile. And concretely, the DA learning team, they applied two elements of Disciplined Agile. One, they utilized the full delivery cycle, which are the phases, which we'll look a little bit more closely at now. And they continuously, they set this goal, they adopted this practice, this mindset rather, of we want to continuously evolve our way of working, our WOW. Phases, let's look at those. So to phase or not to phase, that is the question. The inception phase, as we talked about a little bit earlier on, is all about getting started in the right direction. And so we want to get on the same page. So before the DA learning team, they start a large piece of work, they develop this common vision, or sometimes called a stakeholder vision, for what it is they're about to do, to making sure that their stakeholders and themselves are on the same page. And the courseware development does not begin, they don't write a line of text for this courseware until we have this common vision agreed upon. And what usually goes into this common vision, this is sometimes called a project charter or, a project document. It doesn't really matter what we call it. What is important is that we use it to pay down and lower our risks early on. As in, we sit down and we think about, well, how long is this roughly going to take? What does our schedule look like right now? What are the risks do we see right now? Who's involved? How does that team work together? What is it roughly going to cost? Are there some assumptions we're making here? You draw that up relatively high level, and then you go through a couple of iterations with your stakeholders where you present them with this. You get some feedback on it where they go, no, we're not doing this. We're doing this instead. And you're like, okay, good. I'm glad we know now before we start it. Or they'll say, well, what about that risk? What about that risk right there? What are you going to do with that before you start? Are you going to do something about that before you start? And you go back and forth a couple of sort of rounds, a couple of iterations, and you get to that point where everyone goes, yes, this is what we're doing. And then you start the construction phase. And as I said earlier, by doing this, we lower our risks earlier on inside the development, because I'm sure you've all been in the situation I have for certain that a team will start some work, and then we get, a month or 2 or 3 months down, into the development, and someone goes, oh, I thought we're doing it this way. No, we're doing it that way. And you go, if only we had spent a little bit more time in inception to get this cleared out, to get that clarified and sort of cleared up, we would have lowered that risk. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you have to spend months in preparation and getting ready. Most teams, they spent 2 weeks on their inception, and then they are off and running. And that is exactly the next point, the construction, the next phase. It's sort of ready, set, go. We're ready now. And this is actually in my experience, it's actually one of the harder points about inception. You sort of have to hold the team back almost like a pack of race horses, that everyone, when you start talking about a new idea and a new feature you're building, you're like, let's just get going. This is so exciting. And you sort of have to hold them back. So, well, just hang on for a moment. Let's just make sure that we have this common vision agreed to. And then, then we go, then we're off out of the start blocks. So it's that exactly that we are ready to start, that we have this agreement on a common vision. We've lowered our delivery risk. So we're ready to go. And it ends. So this, you can do this in a number, in, the construction phase, you can do this in a number of different ways, depending on your life cycle. If you are, if you are a Scrum team, well, the life cycle will be a number of iterations. If you're a lean team, well, lean teams do not have iterations. Then it will just be a set length until you've built enough functionality. If you're a program team, well, then it might be a number of program increments. Maybe it's just one program increment. Maybe you need to build two before you have some functionality. It really depends on how you shape this up and how you form this. Yet what doesn't change is the fact that you are ready to release when you have enough functionality built, and that is of value for the customer. And that's exactly what the learning team did, that when their course had enough functionality, it was then ready to be released. Again, just hang on a moment. We're not quite ready to put this out into the hands of our customers because we have the transition phase. And the transition phase is all about getting ready for the release, as in sort of dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Again, I'm sure you've experienced this, that we built something we're really proud of. It works well. We're like, let's go. Let's put it into the hands of the customers. But what if, we haven't trained our help desk staff? What if we haven't written an FAQ to put on a website of how to better use this? What if we didn't write, the marketing sort of message that needed to be published at the same time? That all sort of takes away from the usability of what we built, what we put into the hands of the customer. So we need all those sort of all those extra points. We need to consider those, and that is what we did here in the DA learning team. They did as well. They wanted to ensure that the product was sort of ready. And you have some examples, some options over in this ensure production readiness goal diagram that you see up there in the upper right-hand corner about, well, have we done alpha testing? Have we finalized our deployment plan? Have we finalized our documentation? Have we trained and educated our stakeholders? Have we prepared the support environment? Like all those good points to make sure that it's actually consumable and usable to the people that we put this into the hands of. And in the case of the DA learning team, it was the instructors and it was the students, and then it was the externally the ATP organizations. Yet internally, we also had a team for ATP. We had customer care. They also needed to understand what was being built here. All right, last one. So patterns and anti-patterns of evolving your wow or evolving your way of working. And there's going to be a little bit of repetition here because obviously sometimes you draw a pattern and the anti-pattern is sort of the opposite of that. Yet I will add some different flavors to different ones and some examples of, to them to make sure that's not too repetitive. So patterns, good patterns of evolving your wow. So it's adapting to your context and being pragmatic. We spoke about this a little bit earlier, that the team you're in is going to be slightly different than your neighboring team, and it's certainly going to be different from the team. Let's say you just came from another organization and you're working in a Scrum team there. You're like, well, this works really well for us. I'm just going to apply the same thing here, and chances are it's likely not going to work. So again, you have to adapt to your you have to adapt your context, adapt to your context, and you have to be pragmatic when you consider evolving and choosing a way of working. You have to remember that you have more than one option. Again, this is bringing it back to the DA principles of choice is good. Again, imagine if we only had one option, we would be really sort of locked in and sort of, we're sort of, my hands are tied. I can't, if this option doesn't fit us, like we're stuck. We don't know what to do. So remember, we always have more than one choice, more than one option. That is really, really key when working with a team in terms of evolving their wow and evolving their way of working. Another good pattern of evolving our wow is that we want to involve the team and we want to let them have a say. There's picking a life cycle, picking a way of working for a team without their influence is probably not going to work. They know their context the best. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you, as a manager, as a coach, or a scrum master, whatever your role is, whatever your title is, that doesn't mean you can't have a say. It doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with the team, but they have to be in the driver's seat. The team has to be in the driver's seat. We cannot just go and say, well, work this way and make it work. They have to be involved. And finally, being enterprise aware and not only doing what is locally convenient. So that ties a little bit to the previous point. So yes, we want to make sure the team is in the driver's seat. We want to make sure the team is involved when they pick their way of working and evolve it. Yet we also want to make sure that they don't pick something that's just really convenient for them, but then it screws everyone else over, as in, oh, suddenly, we can't work with this team anymore. And the way we work now doesn't work with that team either. And this is really going to slow things down if we do it for other teams. Like, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You're going to have to solve this in a way so we're enterprise aware and pick a way of working that is enterprise aware. So we don't just pick something that is locally convenient. We pick something that actually is convenient for other teams to make sure we don't get sort of inadvertently get in their way. So taking that and turning it upside down, again, I'll attempt not to be too repetitive here, but the anti-patterns of evolving your way of working is that we want, if you're purist and judgmental, I don't see this much anymore in the agile space, but 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was this sort of there's this saying that you're doing Scrum, but as in you're doing Scrum, but you're not doing the retrospective, and it was very judgmental. It was very purist. It was like, really, geez, you can't figure out how to do Scrum well. It's so simple. Just do whatever's in the guide, you'll be just fine. But maybe something in the Scrum guide didn't work for that particular team, and there was a lot of judgment around it. Thankfully, when I'm not seeing that as much anymore in the agile space, I'm seeing people being more open-minded. Yet there certainly was a flavor of that, previously. So we want to avoid being purist, saying there's only one way of doing this. And we want to avoid being judgmental. We're not the agile police. We don't hit teams over the head with our agile stick and say, you have to do it this way. That is certainly an anti-pattern. Offering up just one option. Again, hard not to be repetitive here. But again, if you just offer up one option, that is certainly an anti-pattern. Because again, imagine if that doesn't fit the team, they're like, oh, geez, that's all we have. We can't do anything else. We're stuck. So, for example, it could be that, well, you have to do retrospective every 2 weeks. What if for some reason that doesn't work for the team? Or let's say, perhaps an even better example, you have to plan your work out for 2 weeks at a time if you're using Scrum. That's giving them one option. Whereas, in fact, well, maybe you don't have to do that, right? Maybe your work isn't that plannable. Maybe you get a lot of sort of production issues that come in that has to be fixed right away. And you can't plan those per definition because they weren't there yesterday. So again, you offering up just one option and sort of one way of doing things is certainly an anti-pattern when it comes to evolving and improving the way that you work. Making decisions on the team's behalf. A great example of that is I'll protect the innocent or really protect the guilty this time. I was working with an organization where they were doing, they had these teams that were running, and they were all doing 2-week iterations. And someone somewhere decided, well, it would work better if everyone did 3-week iterations because they would just fit our project plan better, and it's just going to work out. So that was a great example of a bad decision of someone locally making a decision on all the team's behalf that they have to switch from 2 to 3-week iteration because it just fit better with the project plan. And of course it threw everything off. The teams had to adjust to it and had to sort of set up it looks so simple on paper, but it really threw things off, and it took a while before the teams got back sort of into the rhythm then of using 3-week iterations. And lastly, optimizing for local convenience. Again, a little bit of a repetition from obviously the pattern, but again here, optimizing for local convenience means that we do something, we pick a way of working or evolve or wow, so it really fits us and it's so convenient for us. Yet we may inadvertently be getting in other teams' ways, and we don't want to do that because, again, remember the principle of optimizing flow, meaning that we want to optimize from wherever the value stream starts through all these teams and all these parts of our organization to the other part. We want to optimize for that, not for local convenience. All right, so let's wrap up and get to the Q&A. I've been sort of been keeping an eye on. There are lots of good questions here. So the first thing I want you to do is find that piece of paper or that note where we took it, that question that we asked right in the beginning about what is your knowledge of Disciplined Agile right now? And we're going to repeat that. How would you rank your knowledge now here about 45 minutes later, has it moved? Has it moved up? Has it stayed the same? Hopefully it hasn't moved down. Then I did something wrong. And feel free to share in the chat, if it moves from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 or 5 to 7 or stayed the same, or if it moved down, feel free to share that in the chat. That will be wonderful to see. I'll give you a moment to reflect on that. And then while you reflect on that, I am going to mention this right here, that I can only encourage you to keep your learning journey about Disciplined Agile going. Obviously, these great Disciplined Agile talks here with the PMI Poland chapter is an excellent option. There is also the website that I mentioned earlier, the pmi.org/Disciplined Agile. For more information, there's the toolkit in there. There's a mindset, there's books, the classes you can take. There's also obviously certification you can pursue. And if you are a PMI member, you can get a free PDF copy of this Choose Your Wow book right here. And then to wrap us up before we get to the Q&A, I'd love if you can summarize in 3 words what this past 45 minutes was like. So how would you summarize these past 45 minutes in 3 words, using 3 words? And please share them, feel free to share them in the chat. I'm curious to see what words you would use. I'll give you a moment to do that. So 3 words, how would you summarize this past 45 minutes using 3 words and 3 words only? Feel free to write that in the chat, and then we'll get to the Q&A. All right, amazing, inspiring presentation. Thank you. Quick intro. Busy of content, yeah, there's a lot. More than expected. Well, that can both be a good and a bad thing. Brief but comprehensive. All right. Clear introductory overview. All right, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. So now we get to the question part. So this is where you ask the questions and I provide the answers. So I don't know, Marta or Martina, whether you want to pick some of the questions or you just want
yes,
me to,
but now I would like to thank you for the great dose of knowledge. And the first question from the chat is, does DA provide certification for implementing toolkit with large organization? For example, certified SAFe program consultant.
Right. Great question. I would say sort of a yes and a no answer. So the no part is that there is no Disciplined Agile certification right now. There's like DA for programs, a DA, for a large team. There's no certificate for that specifically. The yes part of the question is that there are more advanced certifications, and I would highlight a couple. I would highlight the DA Senior Scrum Master, which deals with more complex situations, and it equips you as a Scrum Master and a team lead to deal with more complex situations, and also starting to look outside your own team and starting to look at, well, how do we coordinate across different teams? So the DA SSM or DA Senior Scrum Master, and also the DA Value Stream Consultant is another. It's not specifically built for large programs, yet it is an advanced DA certification, again, that takes you out of one team view, and it gives you sort of tools, equips you with tools and techniques of how to manage the value stream across the entire organization. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We've got also one question prior to this event. So does Disciplined Agile provide, how would you encourage a large organization that promotes SAFe to implement or to try DAD?
Thank you. Yes, I get that question quite a bit. And again, sort of twofold. And again, obviously, we could, this is almost an entire webinar in itself, an entire presentation in itself, that question, and providing a thorough answer to that. But twofold, I would say, one, I would point to, where are the challenges? What are the challenges you're faced today with when you're practicing SAFe? Is it that, and this is what I see most often, that inside the company, we have a program that's running, like ICBC. They have a program that was running, for a set amount of time. It was, there was about 8 teams across 3 different departments. And yet they had other teams that were not part of the program, and they do not need to be part of the program because there isn't that codependency on their work. So by using Disciplined Agile, we were able to have the program running over here using sort of a scaled methodology. And over here, we're able to have regular Agile and Lean teams, just doing their own thing. So DA sort of invited us and gave us a space to do both of those in parallel. The question I would, put back to companies that are using SAFe today: are you in a similar situation? And I would venture most companies are. Most companies today that are practicing SAFe are in that exact situation, that they have a program running inside the team, inside the organization. Great, we're using SAFe for that. And then we have all these other teams that are not part of the program, but we don't know what to do with them. Do we just let them be? Do we make them part of the program? There are really no good answers for that. So that's where I would start, is SAFe really solving all the challenges that you need to solve inside your organization. And in most cases, the answer is going to be no, it is not solving that. Then the second point I would then highlight is that, well, you can continue with SAFe inside your company. And then we have DA for these other teams. And then DA then gives us this unifying language where the people practicing SAFe or the program lifecycle, whatever we end up calling it, can use the same language as the teams that are not part of the program. So it becomes sort of this unifying language. Those are the 2 areas I would start. Is SAFe, is SAFe, solving all the challenges? And if the answer is no, well, you can keep using SAFe, and then you can use DA for the other teams and fold SAFe into DA as well, which really, it is already SAFe. You can say that SAFe is a part of Disciplined Agile. It is part of sort of the umbrella and the toolkit, we call Disciplined Agile. That was a medium-sized answer. I hope that answered your question.
Okay, thank you. So, and we've got the next question. So, is DA recognized as an official framework? It has certification, so I would guess yes. So what do you think about this?
You guessed correctly.
Maybe
it has certifications. Yes, it has. It is the agile choice of PMI. It is the agile choice of a lot of organizations and companies around the world, because they recognize it is pragmatic. They recognize it's not purist. They recognize that they can use Disciplined Agile to sort of solve the challenges that they're faced with inside their organization. It can be used for non-software teams as well. So lots of company recognizes that. Same thing with PMI. So PMI DA is PMI's answer for Agile and for agility. So yes, it is very much recognized. And there are lots of certifications, or not lots, but 4 or 5, I think 4 or 5. Thank you.
So, Klaus, do you know if ICBC is still in transformation or in transition?
Yeah, well, I don't know if they're still in transformation or transition. I think what, my experience with companies that start on an agile journey and an agile transformation is that over time, it sort of evolves into more of becoming a learning organization, and sort of this organization that can respond quickly and swiftly to changes that happen, such as, the COVID pandemic that we've been living through the past couple of years. And it becomes less about doing agile in a certain way. It becomes less about, we're all in an agile transformation, and becomes more about, as a company, we want to increase our agility overall. We want to be able to, as a company, to respond to these external and internal changes. Maybe again, sorry for the same example, but the COVID example is just such a great example. There's nothing great about COVID, but it was a great example of how, and something changes internally that companies have to respond to. We saw, so many companies have to shift to a work from home, strategy and a work from home approach. We saw so many companies that were used to having customers coming into the stores, and now suddenly they had to start selling their products online. We saw so many companies that had to shift from producing one item that wasn't really that needed anymore to producing something that was much more needed. So we saw all these shifts, and I would bet that, and I would venture that companies that had a higher level of this enterprise agility, they were able to shift much more quickly than other companies. And that's really what I see, companies start this agile transformation journey, this agile journey, that they over time evolve into, well, it becomes less about how we practice agile and whether it's Scrum or whether it's Kanban, and more about, as an entire organization, how are we able to respond quickly to these types of changes. So yes, so ICBC is still on that journey about how to become this organization that can more swiftly respond to these internal and external changes. And I believe that they are still using DA. I believe they're still using DA as well. Yes.
We have a few more questions, but as we are running almost out of time, Klaus,
yes.
can we ask you for a favor? Can we send you remaining questions via email? Will you be that kind and reply to us so that we can share them later on with our participants?
Yes, of course.
Perfect. So guys, if you still have some question in your mind, post it on the chat. We will make sure that everything will be addressed to Klaus. And now some short summary. Everyone who has signed it with his or her name and surname or a ticket number can use the PDU claim code visible on the slide. And this code will be also sent to you via email together with today's presentation. In a second, a short feedback survey will appear on the screen. We would appreciate if you would fill it out and stay on the call, as we have short requests to you also. So we encourage you to use PMI resources and follow us on our social media. If you would like to get a participation certificate, you can request it via email to the mail that is also presented on the screen. It's spoletnoisda at pmi.org.pl. And before we go, we have a little request to all our participants. Let's end the recording with a warm thank you for participating in the 4th Discipline Talks. Thanks a lot, Klaus, also for your inspiring talk. And we would like to ask each of you to turn on your cameras and